Live. Today I have the pleasure of Felicity Ashley. Welcome to you, Felicity.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Good to have you. You are a mother, you're a marketeer, you're a mariner, a motivator, and after 20 years working as a blue chip marketing leader, business founder, and mother of three, you decided to row the Atlantic, as you do, whilst unknowingly fighting cancer. You now guide leaders, teams on their own transformational journeys, showing how harnessing a positive mindset is key to thriving in work and life. And so we are going to be exploring about your Atlantic row, but also your bowel cancer survivor, how you survived that and what your learnings are from that, all relating to sort of resilience. Just before we go into that, Felicity, I'd just like to ask you, what do you love about what you do?
I think what I love about what I do now as a professional speaker is, it may sound cheesy, but it's really a way of connecting my work with my purpose and my passion. And I think it was the experiences rowing the Atlantic and then being very quickly diagnosed with bowel cancer that really gave me a new purpose. And particularly after my cancer surgery, my bowel surgery, I woke up feeling really compelled to share a picture of me lying in my hospital bed with tubes up my nose looking horrendous, alongside the picture of me just having finished the row looking, fitter and stronger than ever, because it was such a stark juxtaposition of the two things. And I think there is still that tendency to think that it doesn't happen to young people, especially bowel cancer. And I really wanted to raise awareness and show that it really can happen to anyone at any point in their lives. And just because you feel or look fit and strong doesn't mean you're going to be immune to it. And so really it gave me this new purpose to kind of share my story, to help other people, to help other people try and avoid going through what I've had to go through and what so many other people go through. Because, with cancer and I suppose with all serious illnesses, early diagnosis is the key to better patient outcomes. And I know that I was helped in the past by being made aware of symptoms, which is why I went to the GP in the first place. So if I can do my bit to pay forward that, then it's a job well done. But also I get to talk about the row, and honestly, it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And so to be able to kind of relive that through my work is just such a privilege.
And just starting with the row, could you take us through your decision why you decided to row the Atlantic as a challenge? Bearing in mind, I'm aware that you had a hip replacement prior to this. So almost what inspired this almost extraordinary goal?
There were a few things, but I suppose I had the hip replacement, and that really, having lots of hip pain had curtailed most of my kind of physical challenges. I was still running and I was still keeping reasonably fit and active, but I couldn't contemplate doing any kind of long endurance events because my hip just wasn't up to it. So having the hip replacement kind of opened the door to a new world of opportunities for me. And it showed me that I could go and do stuff again, because my hip surgeon said, well, you might not want to run a marathon, but you can pretty much do anything else. And I took him at his word. And then shortly after that, my brother-in-law actually rowed the Atlantic. So David, my sister's husband. And when I first heard about him doing it, I thought he was mad. I just couldn't understand why you would want to put yourself in a tiny little exposed ocean rowing boat in the middle of a massive ocean with, massive waves and all of the unpredictability that brings. I just thought it was ridiculous.
Yes, Felicity, why?
Why? I know. And then I watched him finish the race on Facebook Live, and he finished in the middle of the night UK time, and I set my alarm and watched it sitting in my bed on my iPad. And I just remember seeing his little boat coming out of the darkness and crossing the finishing line and feeling this wave of kind of excitement, spine tingling excitement up my spine, and seeing the utter joy on the faces of his crew. And I just thought, wow, if I feel this excited thousands of miles away, sat in my bed, what must it be like to be in that boat, crossing that line and achieving something which so few people have ever done? And to put it into context, when we did the row, fewer than 250 women had ever rowed an ocean. So it really is, it's a niche activity. And at that moment, seeing David finish the race, I knew it was something that I wanted to experience for myself. But I kind of rationalized that the children were too young at the time. They were 2, 4, and 6. And I sort of thought about it and thought, well, perhaps in 5 to 10 years, when I'm not so old I can't do it, but when the children are a little bit older and more independent, that might be a good time to think about it. But life never goes according to plan, as I've learned. And just 2 weeks later, my sister Pip called me and she said, "I've got a boat. Do you want to do it?" And I suppose, there obviously was a decision to be made, and I got a conversation with my husband around how we might make it possible. But yeah, one thing led to another, and 24 hours later, I called her back and said, "I'm in."
My goodness, my goodness. That's a very, very quick shift and decision making there. And in terms of, I mean, I work with a team of rowers who rowed round or aim to row around Great Britain. So I've worked with that sort of the process of it all. Talk me through some of the challenges you faced even getting to the start line, because people perhaps don't realise there's a lot beforehand. And so just some of the, not just the challenge, but how you overcome some of those challenges, and whether they were just mental challenges or literally challenges you had the team had to face and overcome.
Yeah, I mean, they do say with ocean rowing that the hardest part is getting to the start line, and we sort of poo-pooed that a bit when we first entered, but actually it is really the case, because there are so many challenges, both mental, physical, logistical, practical, all of it. So we trained for about 2 years to do the row. I think being mums, so we have 11 children, the four of us in the crew have 11 children between us, varying in ages. Mine were the youngest, at 2, 4, and 6 when we started training. That brings complications and challenges in its own right, because there are the logistics of being able to take the time to do the training, especially when you need to get out on the water and be away from home. So that was hard, because it obviously puts it puts a weight on the other people in your life, so your support crew. So Paul, my husband, had to pick up some of the pieces there and step up and and take responsibility when I was away. But there were so many other challenges, and lots of people kind of focus in on the physical challenge of rowing an ocean. But actually, a lot more of it's about mental and practical stuff. So, for example, in the training, it was, how do you raise the money that you need to raise to get to the start line? It was about trying to find sponsorship. Then managing our boat. Our boat was the oldest in the fleet, the original boat that was built for the purpose. And that came with problems, because she was old, she needed lots of work doing, and kind of almost everything we touched fell apart. So that, caused extra challenges and extra grief. It was extra money that we had to find to make all those boat repairs. It was extra time when we couldn't put her in the water and be out training. Then there were things like crew changes. Again, because we were mums, it's hard to get away. It's hard to commit to being away for 2 months with young children. And so we had 3 or 4 different kind of crew changes through the period of training. And that each time that happens, you've got to then try and find somebody new that can fit into the team. You've got that question mark over, are we going to be able to do it, or do we have to go as a 3? So there's all sorts of things that are thrown into the mix from left field that you just have to try and accommodate and work your way around. And then, there's the mental challenge. Am I going to be able to do this thing? If only 200 women in the world have ever done it, am I going to be physically and mentally up to it? It's
Mm.
about the mental preparation in terms of kind of getting yourself used to the idea that you're going to be in the middle of nowhere with no help apart from the 4 of you in the boat, and you're going to have to cope with whatever that ocean throws at you. It might be massive waves, storms, it might be marlin strikes, any number of things could happen, and you've got to cope. And it's mentally preparing yourself for those kind of different scenarios. And then, of course, there was the physical challenges as well. And, we had various injuries through our training period, because we were putting our body through enormous strain. And all of those things are things that you just have to continually pick yourself up from and find a way through. But I think, earlier on you asked the question about why did I do it? I think having a why, having a really strong kind of motivation for doing it, is what helps you get through all of those challenges.
Mm.
And for us, the thing that united us as a crew was inspiring our children, and inspiring them to dream big and to show them that with the right mindset, with the right people around you, and with a lot of hard work, anyone can do extraordinary things. And so each time we hit a challenge, I just remember thinking, if we give up now, what's that telling our children? What's that showing our children about, sticking at things and working hard and finding a way through? And so actually having that as our purpose really was a tremendous motivation to keep us going through all of those challenges that we faced.
And was there moments when you thought this is just not going to happen? It's just too big. There's too many complications. It's just not the right time.
Genuinely, no. No, there were absolutely hard times. But I just had this, I suppose, deep desire to do it, and a belief that we would get there, that if we kept plugging away, that we would find a way to get there. And that, I think that comes from confidence, comes from inner belief, but it also comes from having this motivation that we will find a way through them. Because most challenges are surmountable. It might be hard to see the way through when you're in the thick of it, but there's always a way through. There's always a silver lining, in my experience. And I knew that if we came together and united as a crew, that we could get through anything. And that certainly was the case. We literally came through countless challenges, including a run-in with COVID just 2 weeks before the race start, which was probably the hardest thing that we had to navigate in the entire time. But it was just that sense of pulling together and having this belief that we would get there.
And did your belief sort of grow as you overcome these challenges? Because often when people overcome things, it just inspires confidence. There's a bit of a momentum can gather. Did you find that as well?
Absolutely, because then you've got real life examples of, well, if I've done that and I've got through that thing, then I can get through anything else that comes at me. And that was certainly a case during the row itself. You really don't know what you're going to face. And it's about being, expect the unexpected. And I remember I think it was the second or third night, we had two very close encounters with two other boats. And that's very unusual. Normally, you may well spend the entire crossing, 40 days or more, without seeing another boat. But on our second or third night, I came out from my sleep to go on shift, and the whole crew was on the boat. On deck, and there was pandemonium going on, and there was people looking and pointing at things. And there was what had happened was our AIS alarm, our automatic identification system alarm, had gone off to say that we were on collision course with another vessel. And so we tried to radio the boat. It turned out to be a yacht. We tried to radio it and it wasn't responding. So eventually we had to let off a white flare to visually show that there was another boat within the area. Unfortunately, it then kind of diverted. So that was a sort of a minor panic out of the way, because we were literally on collision course with this big boat. And then the same thing happened 2 hours later when I came out for my next shift. This time we couldn't see the boat on our AIS system, but there was obviously a large boat approaching because we could see the lights heading straight for us. So that time we had to then put out an anonymous call on the radio. Unfortunately, it was responded to, and it was a Spanish naval ship, which was why it wasn't showing up on our automatic identification system. And they were on collision course, and we would have been fish fodder. Had they hit us, we would have been toast, never to be seen of or heard of again. But we used our training, we dug into our resources, and we found a way of coping with those scenarios. And those two things gave us a massive confidence boost early on in the race, because we'd coped with something completely from left field, that we didn't really know how to handle, and we'd done a decent job, and we'd got through the night. And so many things, in a similar vein, happen throughout the crossing, and each time you can see this visible shift in body language and in confidence in the crew, as we realize that we are doing it and we are coping with these challenges. And each time we do that, we're kind of growing.
And how did you deal with? I mean, obviously, after a number of days, I don't know how have you ever got trouble, seasickness or not, or did it just go? But in terms of the sort of physical exhaustion that hits you, and it really starts to impair decision making, doesn't it? How did you deal with that and have a plan for that, and how you would work as a team?
Yeah, it's interesting with ocean rowing, because it's not like running where you're, physically out of breath. It's just, it's long and slow and hard. And it's that gradual, I suppose, impact over time on the body. And what we didn't really appreciate was how much weight we were losing, because when you're seeing each other every day, you don't notice these weight shifts. But you're right, it does impact. And it's a combination, I think, of, you know, the impact of the body from rowing all the time, which then means that you're losing weight, but also the sleep deprivation angle as well. So generally, you're just knackering your body, really. And I think it can start to affect emotional state and mental state. It didn't with all of us on the boat, but certainly one of the girls who lost the most weight really struggled in the final week, with emotions and managing difficult situations. And I think that was a lesson for all of us, really, is the importance of self-care and looking after yourself, and being proactive about that, not because once once you're having to be reactive, it's too late. It's about being proactive.
Mm,
So it's about being really diligent and vigilant about getting enough sleep. So making sure that we were sleeping in every off shift, not just the night shift, but every off shift, and forcing ourselves to eat, because it was really hot. It's getting up towards 40 degrees, and you don't feel like eating, but you've got to make yourself eat to just be able to keep up your physical strength, which then impacts your sort of mental resilience as well. So I think there were lots of lessons learned, which would mean we would do it slightly differently if we were to do it again. Because it's those things that you don't necessarily notice at the time that you realize then are impacting things as we go along.
yeah, and I'm sure you've learned tons from the row in terms of how you deal with difficult situations or going into the unknown. How did you keep that sort of positive mindset, that belief that you'll get there, that you'd finish, that you'd achieve it, and as a team, how did you sort of encourage each other to keep that going despite all those challenges you have, whether that's the physical stuff or the mental stuff or boats coming at you that are going to tear you up, as it were?
Um, I think it was very much a case of breaking it down into smaller chunks, because when you're standing on the start line in La Gomera, the finishing line is nowhere near in sight. It's way beyond the horizon. 3,000 miles is just an unfathomable distance to row, and you've no idea how long it's going to take you. We hoped that we'd finish within 45 days, but you're really at the mercy of the weather conditions. And never having rowed those kind of distances before, you really don't know how you're going to fare. So it's about breaking it down into much smaller chunks that you can realistically achieve. So it was literally about getting through the first night on board, and that was kind of a tick in the box, and that was an achievement. Then it was the first 24 hours, then it was the first 100 miles, the first 500 miles. And all of those things individually were achievable, and we would kind of, give ourselves pats on the back or celebrate in some small way. It might be with, I don't know, a nice bit of food perhaps, or just, giving a whoop on the boat when we hit those milestones. But that was the way that we were able to see that we were making progress, even though we still had thousands of miles and weeks left to row. So it was in many ways about kind of, especially in the first half of the race, looking back, not looking forward, and seeing how far we'd come rather than how far we still had to go. Because, even at the halfway point, there was still over 1,500 miles to row, and that is still an enormous way. It's weeks and weeks away. And so we couldn't let ourselves focus on the finishing line, because I think that would have been demoralizing. So it was about looking at those smaller steps that we knew that we could get to. But then there was a lot about also understanding each other. And before the race, we spent a lot of time working on crew dynamics and making sure that we really did know how to help each other out. So it's, I think, just basic things like what motivates you, and if you're having a bad day, how can I help pick you up? And that came down to really small things like a hug for somebody or a cup of tea for someone else. And those were things that we were then able to use during the race. There was one occasion when I came out on shift, and my sister came out on shift when I was already rowing, and I could see by the way she held her shoulders that she was struggling. And she got herself ready and sat down to row, and I put down my oars and just gave her a big hug. And that helped her understand that she was seen, she was heard, she was valued, that I knew how she was feeling, and it gave her a massive boost. And I think there's so much in that that we can take, you know, back into the business world about really being aware of the people around you and understanding them and knowing how to help them out, because we all go through these ups and downs, you know, not just rowing an ocean, but in everyday life. And it's so important that we can help each other through those downtimes.
Yeah, there's some great lessons there. I mean, obviously that one you just said at the end about having that community, but also being aware of each other and ways of trying to say lift people up, whether it's a hug or say something or a cup of tea. But there's other analogies we could use that within in the context of organizations. But also that, you know, breaking things down and we're celebrating those small wins. You know, we got through the first night, hooray! Yes, we got another 39. You know, 39 at that point. But it's that small wins. And I know, is it the Royal Marines? They as much as they might focus on an end goal they're trying to achieve in a mission, they all talk about their 1 meter square, and that's all you can think about, and that's all you're in control of, is that 1 meter square in the now, really. And it keeps you a bit more grounded, doesn't it? I know you were grounded, you were on an ocean, sort of floating around, but as being sort of rooted in that way is really helpful. Now you finished this, and you know, well done. And I've talked to a number of rowers on here, and I always get inspired of how people have achieved such a thing. So well done for doing that. It's a great achievement. And I say it's all the bit beforehand. When I was coaching the team of rowers I was working with, it was the beforehand bit was just so many challenges on every level. And crew changes, that's quite a big one, actually, dynamics of that. So yeah, but well done for doing that. That's a brilliant achievement. Then you got some news when you sort of post this, and just talk us through what happened next.
Yeah, so I came back from the row, and we finished at the end of January, came back from the row, and, you know, we all came away with various niggles, most of which end up sorting themselves out, or a bit of physio sorts it out. And that was generally the case with me. But then I'd started to notice, probably in the second half of the race, that that I would need to use the bucket, the boat toilet, for some reason during night shift more than other people. And in fact, I won a crew award for mother most likely to need an inconvenient poo on night shift. It was a very glamorous award, that one. We laughed it off because there was no reason to think it was anything other than the really odd food that we were eating, the volume of food that we were eating, and this very strange activity that we were undertaking. But that didn't settle down when I got home. And in fact, you know, I started needing the loo more and more frequently, and eventually started noticing some blood in my stools as well. And it was at that point that I thought, this isn't right. This isn't going to go away on its own. I better go and see the GP. And so I went to see the GP in early April. And I said, look, I know that some of these symptoms are the symptoms of bowel cancer, because one of the other crews that did our race were rowing in memory of the skipper's wife, who had died from bowel cancer in her mid-30s. And Ed, the skipper, used to post on a regular basis about the symptoms of bowel cancer. And so even though I had no reason to particularly take notice of these posts at the time, they'd obviously gone in. And so in the back of my mind, I recognized my symptoms as being the symptoms of bowel cancer. And so that's what I said to the GP. And, you know, I went through the necessary testing. I was booked in for a colonoscopy. And throughout that process, the message from the medical team was, we just need to rule it out. It's highly unlikely. We just need to rule it out. And that was the message literally as I was wheeled into the colonoscopy theatre. But then it wasn't ruled out. And, you know, midway through my colonoscopy, which was the same day as the rowing awards dinner, and so I didn't have sedation, I was wide awake. They found a fairly significant tumour, and I was told that that's cancer. And it was, you know, literally in those 3 words, you have cancer, you know, my world turned upside down. And, you know, having the thing that you're always asked after something like the row is, what's your next challenge going to be? And I didn't have another challenge, but suddenly here it was. You know, it wasn't a challenge that I'd chosen, but it was, an almighty great health challenge to face. You know, so soon after the row with 3 small children. I mean, it's a massive challenge at anyone's life. But it was, very unexpected. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that must have been tough. And how did you manage that almost psychological contrast between a voluntary challenge of ocean rowing and the involuntary challenge of cancer?
Um, sometimes you have to use a bit of humor. And, when I got back from the row, I remember thinking, I don't really want life to go back to normal. I don't want to have done the row and then things just to go back to normal into my normal life again. And it, it was probably a lesson in be careful what you wish for, because, it might just come true. So there was a bit of a wry smile at points, I think. Um, but I also had some advice from when I was told that I had cancer. There was a flurry of activity, and a senior consultant came into the room, and they knew I'd just completed the row because the nurse doing my pre-observations had commented on how fit I was, and I said, "Oh, I've just rowed the Atlantic." So they'd obviously been talking about this woman that's just rowed the Atlantic, and they all knew about it. And she came in and she said, "Look, just approach this as you approach the Atlantic. It's just another challenge. Approach it with exactly the same determination and courage and attitude, and you'll be fine." And her words really stuck. And I thought, she's so right. I have just rode the Atlantic. I know that I am mentally and physically pretty much bulletproof. Okay, I've got cancer now, but I know I'm mentally and physically tough. I'm resilient, and I just need to apply those same things to this next challenge. And then similarly, after I then was taken to the CT department for a CT scan to see if it had spread. And the nurse looking after me commented on my toenails, which were painted for the awards dinner that evening. And she said, "Oh, your toenails look lovely. What's that for?" So I said, "Well, I was supposed to be going to this party to celebrate the row." And she said, "Look, go." She said, "Nothing has changed physically since you walking through the door this morning. Just go, enjoy tonight because you've earned it, and you'll deal with the challenge of cancer tomorrow or the next day or whenever you need to deal with it." And I thought that was so right as well. It was just a lesson in perspective. We can let, I suppose, with cancer, you can let it rule your life, or you can take the bull by the horns and you can carry on living life. And there was no reason why I couldn't get up and go to that awards celebration, which is what I did. And I think
It
that was
sounds
kind of my attitude throughout was, I'm not gonna let this stop me living my life.
it sounded like you had two people give you some amazing advice that changed your perspective and almost referencing a great challenge just been through. Well, just treat it as that. And what was some of the lessons you got from the row that enabled you to get through cancer?
There was this similar lesson of breaking things down into bite-sized chunks. So, from day one of my diagnosis, it was then, well, the next milestone was waiting for the results of my CT scan, because for about 5 days I didn't know if it was a terminal diagnosis or not. I knew that the tumor was big, but I didn't know if it had spread, if I was, inverted commas, riddled. And so it was about getting to that next point and learning what the likely prognosis would be. And then it was about surgery and getting through my surgery, the rehab following the surgery. And then I went on then, as it was stage 3 cancer, to have chemo. So then it was about literally each round of chemo and being able to kind of break, because cancer treatment can be, it's not a short journey, it's a long journey. And even after your treatment finishes, you then have this 5-year period of being monitored. And so you can't really ever shake it off. And so it's really hard if you're just constantly pinning all of your hopes on getting through it and the end. It's got to be about those smaller milestones in between. And giving yourself a pat on the back for achieving each one of those.
Mm.
Obviously very different to the kind of achievements during the row, but there were significant steps that I had to go through, the family had to go through, and it showed that I was kind of making progress, positive steps. So I think that was one of the things, but it was also leaning back on my knowing that I was mentally resilient and using some of the tools that helped me get through the row and applying them to this challenge of cancer. So one of the tools that I use a lot is the power of reframing. And you know, a lot of people, I think, would be inclined to think in a similar situation, God, why me? You know, I've just rode the Atlantic. I'm young. I've got 3 small children. I'm fit. Why me? But turning it on its head, and my approach was, well, why not me? You know, yes, I'm young, but that's an advantage when you're going through, you know, physical trauma like surgery and then
Mm.
chemo. I am fit and I'm strong, and therefore that's going to help me get through this. And so, in many ways, I'm better placed than almost anyone else to tackle this challenge. And that was the mindset that then helped me get through the cancer. Was there isn't anyone better placed to get through this, and I know I can do it. I'm physically strong. I can use that to help me, and I'm
Mm.
mentally strong as well.
Well, that's a wonderful reframe to do in such a difficult circumstances. How did you stop yourself, besides that, doing that reframe, not wandering into the what if and scenario planning of all the sort of difficult things that could happen going ahead, and almost what could really result in not a very nice outcome? How did you stop yourself sort of slipping in that? Because I'm sure it was quite challenging for that as well.
Yeah, I mean, there were the hardest part was the first 5 days when I didn't know if it was going to be terminal, you know, if I was going to be given a terminal diagnosis or not. And it was quite hard to stop those what if scenarios. And I remember lying in bed with my husband one night and I just turned over and said, what if it's terminal? How are we going to tell the children? How am I going to tell my parents? Because my dad was also going through his own cancer journey at the time. His was terminal kidney cancer, and he was kind of going through the latter stages. So almost that was my bigger preoccupation, was managing it for the people that I loved around me, for my parents and my children. And so that it was difficult, but I just clung to this some kind of inner belief, faith, hope, call it what you like, that it would be okay. Things work. I strongly believe that things happen for a reason, and that I would be okay. And, you know, almost regardless of the outcome, it was going to be okay. And I think that is down to faith. You know, in my case, there is spirituality there. And that was something that my dad always taught us. And I think I probably clung to that, this optimistic outlook on life that, you know, doesn't matter what happens, you'll be okay.
Mm. Yeah, wonderful. And look, going into your, I suppose, your community around you and support systems, how did that differ between your rowing challenge and your cancer journey, or was it the same?
There were definitely similar people involved. Obviously, the, you know, close family rallied around through both challenges. You know, in terms of moral support, emotional support, but also practical support as well. You know, when we were away for the row, Paul bore the brunt of the childcare, but my parents were there as well, and neighbours and you know, school parent friends helping out with the children too, which was amazing. And I suppose it was in many ways the same people then through the cancer treatment, because, you know, I was in hospital for chunks of time, and I couldn't drive for periods, for about 6 weeks after my bowel surgery. So lots of people kind of, you know, would come offering help, which was just brilliant. But then also, you know, there were different sets of people. So when I talk about how, you know, the need to build a support crew of people around you to help you through whatever you're going through, whether it's achieving massive goals or going through challenges. And you need different people for different roles in that. So there's people that you need for kind of a moral support, emotional support, practical support, but there's also those technical specialists as well. So through the row, we had various coaches that were helping us, you know, helping to equip us with the skills and the expertise that we needed to actually row an ocean rowing boat. And then obviously during the cancer treatment, there was the NHS and the amazing team of medical professionals who, quite honestly, without whom I wouldn't be speaking to you today. And so there are lots of different people that kind of you need to bring into this, the ebb and flow of your support crew to help you through different scenarios.
Mm.
And I always say that nobody achieves anything significant alone. And asking for help is such a strength that we all need to learn how to do. And it can be a bit difficult sometimes,
Mm.
but because I think people feel that you're admitting vulnerability or it's a sign of weakness, but it's not. It's such a strength, and knowing when to ask for help and knowing who to ask for help is such a big thing that we all need to be able to master.
Yeah, I talk a lot about, in terms of building your own personal resilience, is having a community around you,
Yeah.
people who either are specialists, advise you, help you in that way, or moral support, hug you, buy you a coffee, buy you a beer, whatever it may be. Almost also down to people who will challenge your thinking, your perspective sometimes in a helpful way. Obviously done in a way that's kind and respectful. Where are you now in terms of your cancer journey? In terms of
so I'm about midway through my 5 years of being monitored. So I have graduated, I suppose, from quarterly scans and blood tests to 6 monthly, which I can only see as a positive. And I've got about another 2.5 years to go. My oncologist said, look, have a party at 3 years and have a bigger party at 5 years. Because the chance of recurrence kind of decreases over time. So I'm getting towards the stage when I can think about, planning a mini celebration and then a bigger celebration in 5 years. But I'm actually marking my 3-year anniversary from diagnosis by taking on the world's highest marathon, so the Everest Base Camp Marathon in May.
Ah, brilliant.
So being inspired by the mountains and the environment, and again, just showing that cancer doesn't have to stop you living life, and it doesn't have to stop you having dreams, and that there can be, excitement and wonderful things afterwards.
Oh, you'll love. I've been to Everest Base Camp, and it's just
an
amazing place. Just being in the depths of all those mountains, it's just awesome. Yeah, no, I loved it. I got a bit of sickness on the way up there, as you do, but eventually made it. And it's one of those things I'm thinking, I paid to be here and I'm feeling absolutely terrible, but I'm still going to keep going until I get there.
I haven't. I've never done anything at altitude before, so I've no idea how my body's going to cope with that. But it's just another challenge.
No, yeah, and I think it's one of those things that even some of the porters we had, sometimes they got it, sometimes they didn't. It's one of those weird things, altitude sickness, I think. And we had some people dropping like flies quite early on. I was almost the latter part. I got it, but yeah, one of those things. Just, I suppose, a final question: with all these experiences that you've been through, what has it taught you about leading through uncertainty that you now share within organizations?
I mean, there's so many different lessons, but I think the biggest thing is being open to change and adapting, staying true to your core values. So not chucking out your entire identity, but being open to making changes along the way to enable you to navigate whatever uncertainty it is that you're facing. So it's that kind of flexibility and being prepared to deviate off your route. And I think one thing I've learned is that life is never a straight line path. And it's fine not to know what not to have your route fully mapped out. Because there will be challenges along the way. There will be, hills that you need to navigate. And it's being open-minded to whatever comes your way and knowing that you can go round it, up it, hop it, whatever. There are ways over it.
Well, thank you for your time, Felicity. You are a real inspiration to have done what you're doing and what you continue to do, and do it with such delight and a smile on your face. Always, it seems to be. How can people sort of connect with you or get in touch with you?
Yes, my website is felicityashley.com. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Felicity Ashley on LinkedIn. And fairly soon I'll have my book out, Stronger Than the Storm. So look out for that in July.
Fantastic. That'd be brilliant. Well, thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.